It happened at the edge of dawn, in that fragile hour when night still clings to the world, and the first pale strip of light crawls across the sky like a wounded promise. The frostbitten wind moved through the abandoned clearing with a sharp, cutting whisper, brushing the brittle grass as if mourning something already lost. She stood there, trembling, her breath turning to white ghosts in the cold air, one hand pressed to her swollen abdomen as though trying to shield the life inside from a world determined to reject them both. Exiled, cast out, marked as unworthy by the very pack that should have protected her. The gates had closed behind her with a metallic thud that felt carved into her bones, and the echo of it still reverberated through her chest, swallowing her heartbeat in a suffocating wave of disbelief. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Hours, maybe. The sky had been black when she'd been forced past the border stones, the Alpha's decree branded into the silence like a cold blade. Now the horizon carried the faintest silver, a dawn she could not welcome, a dawn she feared might be her last. Her legs gave out beside an ancient pine whose bark peeled like cracked leather, and she slid down its trunk, curling over her stomach as though instinct alone could keep the child warm. Her pulse throbbed painfully beneath her fingertips. Every breath felt stolen, every shiver a small fracture of her spirit. Snow clung to the hem of her dress, melting against her skin, soaking through the thin fabric that had once belonged to her mother. She pulled it tighter around her, though it did nothing to stop the biting cold. It seeped through everything, her clothes, her bones, her hope. The forest watched her like something curious, something fragile on the brink of vanishing. Ravenspire territory was behind her. The no-man's land stretched ahead, a labyrinth of gnarled trees and forgotten ruins where rogue wolves prowled, drawn to weakness like shadows drawn to flame. She had nowhere else to go. No home. No allies. Nothing but the tiny heartbeat inside her that pulsed with a stubborn determination she no longer possessed for herself. A tremor passed through her, sharp enough to bring tears to her eyes. The banishment replayed in fragments, the council's cold stares, the murmurs of disgrace, the way the Alpha refused to look at her as she cried out that she carried his heir, his child, his blood. But the pack had already labeled her a liar, a burden, a threat, banished while pregnant, a sentence that stripped her of name, rank, and protection. She had begged him with the last strength she had, but he had remained motionless on the stone dais, framed by torches that cast cruel shadows over the stern lines of his face. He had said nothing, and silence, from an Alpha, was as final as death. Her tears froze before they reached her chin. She pressed her forehead to her knees and tried to slow her breathing, but each inhale was jagged, each exhale breaking apart as though the cold had splintered her lungs. She whispered to the child inside, though her voice barely carried beyond her lips. "Don't be afraid. I'm still here. I'm still fighting for you." But even that sounded hollow, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Another contraction tightened across her body like a band of flame, and a low cry escaped her. Too early, too cold, too alone. She tasted blood from biting her lip, felt the world tilting, narrowing, fading in and out as pain lapped at her consciousness like dark waves trying to drag her under. She forced her eyes open. The forest was blurring, the outlines of trees dissolving into a pale haze. She blinked hard, trying to stay tethered to the moment, to her breath, to her child. A faint, metallic scent drifted in the air, her own fear, her own blood. The wind carried distant sounds. The groan of old branches, the rustle of frost-crusted leaves, the lonely echo of a wolf howl that didn't belong to any pack she recognized. She flinched. She prayed they wouldn't find her like this. She prayed no one would. Shame curled tight in her chest, heavier than hunger, heavier than terror. How had it come to this? How had love turned into exile? The Alpha's voice haunted her, not words, but the absence of them. The cold detachment in his eyes that told her she had already been erased from his story. She remembered the last night she'd seen him truly look at her. Moonlight had carved silver into his dark hair, and the weight of his presence had stolen her breath in a way that felt nothing like fear. He had touched her then, not with dominance or duty, but with a rare reverence she still didn't understand. That memory mocked her now. The silence that followed had destroyed her. Another contraction ripped through her, harsher than before, her hands clawing at the snow as panic surged. Not here, not alone, not like this. Her vision pulsed with darkness, the forest tilting again, the cold pressing deeper until she could no longer feel her toes. She tried to stand, but her legs refused. She sank back down, her breath catching on a sob she didn't even hear. The pain came again, relentless and unmerciful. She screamed into the empty forest, her voice cracking into the wind. The storm inside her body raged, twisting, tearing, bringing life and death into the same fragile moment. She thought of the Alpha then, his impossible strength, his unyielding command, the way the air always thickened when he entered a room, as though even the flames bent toward him. She wondered if he felt anything now, if he sensed her pain across the distance, if the bond that had never been acknowledged still lived somewhere deep beneath his armor of power and pride. The snow brightened as dawn pushed further across the horizon, revealing the tremor in her hands, the tears frozen against her skin, the raw desperation carved into every line of her trembling body. She felt the next contraction building like a brutal storm front. Her nails dug into the earth. The world narrowed to a single point of agony and instinct. She bore down with a cry that tore from the deepest part of her lungs, and the forest seemed to hold its breath with her. Minutes, hours, she couldn't tell. Time dissolved into pain, cold, fear. Then, finally, a sound broke through the haze. A small, fragile cry, thin as a thread, but powerful enough to pierce the veil between despair and hope. A baby's cry, her baby's cry. She gathered the child against her chest, her arms shaking so violently she feared she might drop him. He was warm, so warm, compared to her. She pressed her cheek to his tiny forehead, inhaling the faint scent of him. Milk, warmth, life. Tears finally came freely, melting the frost on her skin. She whispered apologies, promises, names she had never dared speak aloud. The baby quieted, blinking in the faint light of morning. She looked down at him, truly seeing him for the first time, and her breath caught. His eyes, though barely open, glimmered with a color she knew too well. Not her own, not anyone's except. A sudden crack echoed through the trees, like branches snapping under the weight of something enormous. Her head jerked up. Breath stopped in her throat. Heavy footsteps. Slow, deliberate, familiar. The forest seemed to bow as the silhouette emerged from the mist, towering, broad-shouldered, wrapped in the aura of a king who commanded storms with a single word. The Alpha. The air thickened with his presence. The cry of the newborn ceased completely, as if even he could sense the power approaching. She froze, every muscle taut, her heart beating so loudly she feared he would hear it and mistake it for defiance. The Alpha stepped into the clearing, the early light cutting across his face like a blade, revealing eyes that burned with something she had never seen in him before. He stared at her, then at the fragile bundle cradled against her chest. For the first time since her banishment, she didn't feel the cold. She felt terror, and something else, something that trembled beneath her ribs like fate stirring from sleep. He took one step closer, and the forest seemed to exhale frost. She didn't speak. She couldn't. His gaze dropped to the newborn, and the moment his eyes met the baby's, the world stopped. Shock, recognition, a truth too powerful to deny, because the child carried his eyes. The forest felt different now, not warmer, not safer, but charged with a trembling tension that seemed to coil through every branch as though nature itself held its breath in fear of what might happen next. The Alpha's presence changed the very temperature of the clearing. The cold no longer came merely from the frost or the pale morning, but from the quiet force radiating from him, a power so ancient and absolute that even the wind seemed to bow and alter its course to avoid touching him. She clutched the newborn tighter against her chest, her fingers stiff and trembling, but the small weight of him grounded her, reminding her that she was no longer just one life struggling to survive. She was two, fragile and exposed, before the one man whose decision had led her into the heart of this desolate exile. The baby stirred, his breath warm on her skin, a faint whimper barely audible over the distant groan of branches. She lowered her gaze, unable to hold his eyes for long, unable to endure the memory of the moment he looked at the child and saw a reflection of himself. Shame rushed up her throat, thick and suffocating. Shame for loving him, for trusting him, for believing, once, that something in his quiet strength belonged to her. The Alpha's footsteps were slow, deliberate, crushing patches of frost beneath his boots as he approached. Every step carried weight, authority, a silent demand for submission that rippled through her body despite her efforts to resist it. Her wolf, weakened by exhaustion and cold, trembled beneath her skin, instinctively lowering itself in the presence of its rightful king. Even if her heart screamed against the instinct, she curled her knees closer, shielding the baby as though her frail body could act as a fortress against a force that commanded armies and shaped destinies. Her breath came shallow and uneven. His scent reached her before his shadow did, the unmistakable blend of pine resin, cold steel, and the wild edge of winter storms, the scent that had once comforted her and now surrounded her like a shackle she couldn't break free from. He stopped only a few paces away. She didn't dare look up. Silence stretched between them, heavy as the iron gates that had closed behind her when she was cast out. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to speak, to apologize, to beg for mercy she knew he had never promised. But the child moved again, a soft cry slipping past his lips, cutting the silence like a fragile blade. She rocked him instinctively, whispering soothing breaths against his forehead, though her voice shook with terror. Snow fell from a branch above them, landing softly beside her knee, the small sound loud enough to echo in the tension that surrounded them. Her thoughts splintered beneath the weight of fear, memories flashing like shards of broken glass. His cold gaze during the council, the Alpha's decree that she should be banished, the murmurs of the pack accusing her of carrying a child born of deceit, the sting of betrayal so deep it still pulsed inside her like an open wound. She wanted to speak, to plead for him to leave, to let her fade into whatever fate awaited beyond the border stones, but her lips remained frozen as if stitched shut by the chill. The Alpha inhaled slowly, deeply, the cold air rasping in his lungs as though he were fighting something within himself. The gravelly tension in his breath was barely audible, yet it scraped against her senses like the edge of a blade. He had not expected this. She felt it, even without seeing his face. He had not expected the child to bare his eyes. And now the truth stood between them like a flame threatening to consume everything, their past, their futures, the fragile remnants of her dignity. She risked lifting her gaze a few inches, enough to see his boots, tall and dusted with snow, enough to see the subtle tightening of his stance, as though the world beneath him had shifted in ways he was no longer certain he controlled. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening for whatever might come next. The Alpha's voice, when it finally broke the silence, was low and harsh, cracked with a roughness that betrayed the storm roiling beneath his composed exterior. "You should not be here." The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. Even whispered, they were a decree. Her heart tightened painfully. She bowed her head further, tears stinging hot against the frost clinging to her lashes. She wanted to answer, to tell him she had nowhere else to go, that she had been left with nothing, that she had not chosen exile. He had chosen it for her. But the fear strangled her throat. The cold stung her skin, drawing dull aches through her limbs as she held the baby closer, as if her body alone could shield him from destiny's cruel hand. The Alpha shifted his weight, and the slight crunch of snow beneath his boot echoed in her chest like thunder. She felt his gaze burning into her, tracing every tremor, every weakness, every breath she fought to steady. The humiliation of being found here, on the edge of death, covered in frost, giving birth alone, pressed down on her with a weight more suffocating than the cold itself. She wasn't supposed to be seen like this. Not by him. Not by the man who once kissed her like she was a forbidden prayer and abandoned her like she was nothing. She finally forced herself to look up, lifting her trembling chin just enough to see his face. The pale dawn revealed the hard angles of his jaw, the shadowed hollows beneath his eyes, the controlled fury burning inside him. Not at her, she realized, but at himself, though he would never admit it. His gaze flicked briefly to the newborn, then returned to her with a sharpness that made her flinch. She tightened her arms instinctively as though he might rip the baby away, though he hadn't moved. The Alpha exhaled, and the plume of cold air drifted between them like a ghost. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question cut deeper than any accusation the council had hurled at her. She swallowed, gripped by a sudden, overwhelming wave of grief. Her words came out broken. "I did." He stiffened. A tiny shift, but she saw it, felt it. The truth hanging between them was heavier than the sky. She remembered the night she had tried to reach him, the message she had sent through the beta, the plea she had whispered at the gates before they dragged her away. He had never responded. Maybe he had never heard. Maybe he had ignored it. She didn't know which truth hurt more. A distant howl rose in the forest, low and hungry, the cry of a rogue wolf catching the scent of blood. Fear jolted through her body like lightning. The alpha's attention snapped toward the sound, shoulders tensing. The air thickened. His wolf was close to the surface now. She sensed it in the sudden crackle of energy around him, in the way the frost seemed to tremble as if recognizing the presence of a true king. He took one step closer. She pressed her back against the tree, breath hitching, every instinct warning her to submit, to yield, to disappear. But she couldn't, not with her child in her arms. He stopped within an arm's reach, close enough that she felt the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the freezing air around them, close enough that his scent tightened something deep inside her chest. His voice dropped even lower. "This is my border. You cannot stay here." The words were final, unyielding, carved from duty rather than cruelty. But the pain they inflicted was sharp enough to slice her open. She bowed her head, blinking away tears that blurred the newborn's face. She had known this, known he would not offer her shelter, known she was no longer part of the pack, no longer anything but a disgrace branded by exile. Yet some small, foolish, desperate part of her had prayed that seeing the child might change something in him. A delusion, a mercy too costly for a king. She shifted slightly, wincing as pain shot through her abdomen. The alpha noticed instantly, his eyes narrowing. "You're bleeding," he said, the words more observation than concern, but the edge of tension in his voice betrayed something else, something jagged and barely restrained. She shook her head weakly. "I'm fine," she lied. But the truth was obvious in the way her body sagged against the bark, in the trembling of her arms, in the pallor beneath the frost clinging to her skin. The alpha's breath deepened again, a slow inhale that scraped her senses raw. The baby cried, a soft whimper muffled against her chest, and she felt the alpha's attention pull toward him, magnetized by blood, instinct, destiny. His eyes lingered on the child longer now, seeing not just the matching color but something deeper, something undeniable. His heir, his lineage, his mistake. She felt the shift in him before she saw it, the subtle fracture in his controlled expression, the storm tightening behind his eyes. The forest grew still again, as if bracing for the moment the truth would force him to choose between duty and fate, between pride and blood, between the king he had vowed to be and the man he had once allowed himself to become. She held her breath, knowing that whatever he said next could shape everything. Her life, her child's future, the unraveling of the destiny she had been cast out for. But before he spoke, another sound cut through the clearing. A branch snapped. A low growl vibrated through the trees. Rogue wolves, drawn by blood, drawn by weakness, drawn by her. The alpha's head whipped toward the sound, his jaw tightening with lethal intent. She felt the air shift again, thickening with danger, tightening with the promise of violence. And beneath it all, her fear deepened, not for herself, but for the tiny heartbeat in her arms. The forest had awakened. The danger was closing in, and she was trapped between the man who had condemned her and the darkness that wished to devour her. The cold no longer felt like the true threat. The world was shifting. The alpha knew it. She knew it. And with every passing second, the forest crept closer to revealing a brutal truth. Exile was not the end of her suffering. This was only the beginning. The growl echoed again, low and predatory, vibrating through the trees like a warning carved from the bones of the forest itself. She felt it before she heard it, a shift in the earth beneath her, a ripple of primal hunger edging closer, carried on the cold wind that sliced through the clearing. The alpha's gaze hardened instantly, his posture changing with a subtle violence that sent shivers through her already fragile body. He straightened, shoulders broad and unyielding, his entire frame tightening with the controlled readiness of a born predator. It was as if his wolf rose beneath his skin, stretching, awakening, demanding dominance over whatever dared threaten what was his territory, and possibly what was his blood. The baby whimpered again, sensing danger before any human instinct could register it. She gathered the child closer, her heartbeat quickening to a frantic rhythm that pulsed through her chest. The world seemed to shrink around them, the mist thickening, the trees curving inward like ribs attempting to shield or trap them. She felt the alpha's presence expand, filling the space with an oppressive, electrifying force, that pushed the cold back for a fleeting second. Even in her fear, even in her shame, her body reacted to him with a trembling awareness she couldn't suppress. His power was not simply seen. It was felt, like a storm pressing down on the skin. Another growl answered the first. This one closer. Less cautious, more certain. The alpha moved forward, instinct taking over. She saw it in the way his breath deepened, in the way the muscles in his back flexed beneath his cloak, in the way his head tilted slightly as though tracking heartbeats hidden behind the trees. He didn't look at her now. He didn't need to. His wolf had already mapped the clearing, already assessed the threat, already prepared to kill for the sake of his territory, perhaps even for something more complicated, more dangerous, more undeniable. She pressed herself tighter against the tree, teeth clenching against the cold and the ache in her abdomen. Fear clawed up her throat as shadows slithered between the branches. She could sense at least 3 rogues. She knew their scent, the feral undertone twisted by desperation and hunger. Rogues were wolves who had lost themselves to madness or exile, choosing violence over reason. She too was exiled, but her heart remained tethered to something more human. They were creatures of instinct only. If they found her first, neither her child nor her fragile, weakened body would survive their hunger. The alpha stepped forward again, and the air shifted so abruptly her breath caught. His wolf pressed outward in a silent, thunderous command. The frost at his feet cracked. The wind stilled. Birds in the distance fled. Even the rogues, though hidden, hesitated. He growled, a sound so deep, so resonant, so ancient it seemed to echo across centuries of kingship. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise of death. She had never heard him make a sound like that before. It shook something loose inside her, something she had tried to bury beneath months of humiliation and pain. The man she had known, the man who once touched her as though she were the only soft thing left in his brutal world, had never been this close to the surface. But his wolf, his true self, was now unleashed, coiled with lethal purpose beneath barely contained restraint. One of the rogues stepped from the shadows, eyes glowing with golden hunger, ribs visible through matted fur. A second followed, then a third, circling the clearing with slow, predatory interest. She could smell their intent: blood, flesh, opportunity. The weakest were the easiest targets. He didn't turn toward her, but his voice reached her with a quiet force that made her bones vibrate. Stay still. She froze, her breath frosting the air in rapid bursts. She hated that her body obeyed him, hated the instinct that bowed to him even now, but fear for her child swallowed pride. Her fingers curled protectively around the baby, who began to fuss again, sensing the tension as though the world were trembling through her skin. The alpha took one final step, positioning himself between her and the approaching rogues. His back blocked nearly all light, and though she couldn't see his face, she felt the lethal calm rippling through him, a power so immense she could hardly comprehend how she had once believed he could be indifferent to anything that carried his scent, even her. The first rogue lunged. The alpha moved faster than air. One moment he was still. The next he was a blur of shadow and steel, intercepting the creature with a bone-shattering impact that echoed through the clearing. Fur, blood, and frost exploded outward. She gasped, tightening her grip on the child as fear and awe collided inside her like clashing storms. The sound of tearing flesh vibrated through the forest. A snarl ripped from the alpha's throat. Pure wolf, pure dominion. The rogue screamed, a feral, broken sound that ended abruptly when the alpha's claws sliced through its throat. He didn't pause, didn't breathe, didn't waver. The second rogue charged him from the side, but he spun with impossible control, catching the creature mid-leap and slamming it into the ground with such force the earth cracked beneath them. Snow scattered into the air, sparkling like shards of glass in the rising dawn. The alpha pinned it with one knee, his hand closing around its muzzle. She heard bones break. The rogue went limp. She stared at him in shock, her pulse racing so violently, she felt it in her ribs. Even weakened, even bleeding, even half-frozen, her wolf stirred inside her, answering his with a trembling pull of recognition, of instinct, of destiny. The baby cried louder, sensing the chaos. She rocked him, whispering soft shushing sounds, though her eyes remained glued to the alpha, unable to look away from the man destroying creatures twice his size with the feral grace of a being born to rule. The third rogue approached more cautiously, growling, tail low, circling. It was larger than the others and smarter. Its gaze flicked between the alpha and the vulnerable woman behind him. And that was its mistake. The alpha saw the shift in intent. A snarl ripped from his throat. With such raw violence the trees shook. He lunged, not forward but sideways, intercepting the rogue before it could even consider attacking her. The collision was brutal. The beast screamed, snapping its jaws inches from his face. They tumbled through the snow, a blur of fur, claws, and steel. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with terror as the alpha was momentarily thrown off balance. The rogue pinned him for a split second, jaws snapping dangerously close to his throat. Her heart stopped. Then something terrifying happened. The alpha's wolf surfaced fully. His eyes glowed, not with human strength, but with a supernatural ancestral fire that ignited the clearing. He shoved the rogue off him, rising with a slowness that was more horrifying than speed. It was the slowness of a king who knew he could not be defeated. His aura expanded in a sweeping current of dominance that made the rogue whimper, tail tucking between its legs. But it was too late to flee. The alpha struck with merciless precision. The rogue fell in seconds, its blood staining the frost. Silence settled over the clearing again, thick and ringing, broken only by the sound of the baby's soft cries and the alpha's heavy, controlled breathing as he wiped blood from his hands. He turned slowly, and the moment his gaze found hers, her lungs collapsed around a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He walked toward her, not as a king, not as a wolf, but as something more dangerous, a man confronting a truth he could no longer deny. When he reached her, his shadow fell across her and the child, and she felt the heat of him seep through the cold like a forbidden blessing. He crouched slowly, as though approaching a wounded animal that might vanish if he moved too quickly. His eyes, still glowing faintly with that supernatural gold, lowered to the newborn. A softness flickered there, a fracture in his armor. She tensed, every muscle coiled with fear and wonder. He reached out a hand, not touching the child, not daring to, but hovering close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his palm. "He has my eyes," he said, his voice roughened by battle, by something deeper, something breaking inside him. She swallowed, her throat burning with unshed tears. "You didn't believe me." His jaw clenched. A storm crossed his gaze. Regret, rage at himself, confusion, something terrifyingly close to longing. "I didn't know," he said. She closed her eyes, the ache in her chest tightening painfully. "You could have asked. You could have listened." His breath left him in a slow, tortured exhale. The wind rustled between them, carrying the scent of blood, frost, and the newborn's warmth. "I'm listening now," he said. Her heart cracked at the words, not because they healed her, but because they reminded her of everything she had lost before he spoke them. He looked at her then, truly looked, and something ancient flickered in the depths of his gaze. Recognition, claim, destiny, not declared aloud, but written in the tension between their breaths. A king before his heir, a man before the woman he had cast out, a wolf before his fated bond. He didn't reach for her, he didn't touch her, but his presence wrapped around her like heat, like danger, like a vow he wasn't ready to speak, but could no longer deny. And for the first time since her banishment, she felt something she thought she would never feel again. Not safety, not trust, something more fragile, possibility. The forest had gone eerily silent, as though the snow-covered earth itself sensed that something far more dangerous than rogues now unfolded between them. The alpha remained crouched before her, his breath misting in the frigid air, his eyes fixed on the child with an intensity that carved tremors through her exhausted body. But beneath the hard lines of his features, beneath the tension coiled in his jaw, there was something else flickering. Something she had never been permitted to see in him for longer than an instant. Awe, recognition. A truth long denied now tearing its way to the surface. She swallowed hard, her arms tightening protectively around the newborn, though part of her wondered if it was even possible to protect him from the man kneeling in front of them. A king, a warrior, a wolf whose bloodline shaped the laws she had been cast out under. A man who had once touched her like she was made of something precious and forbidden, and who now looked at her child as though the world had shifted beneath his feet. The alpha's hand hovered a breath above the infant, trembling with a subtlety he tried to mask. His voice, when it finally broke through the cold air, was almost unrecognizable. "I felt something," he murmured, not lifting his gaze. "Before I saw him, before I heard him." His breath deepened, and a shadow crossed his expression. A pull, a thread snapping taut. Her heart twisted painfully. She knew what he meant. She had felt it too, long before she had dared understand it. The bond. The invisible, ancient magic older than the packs themselves. The one that tied fated mates long before they ever met, long before truth or pride or fear interfered. She had tried to ignore it for months. He had forced himself to. And now, it lay between them like a wound reopening. She forced her voice out, though it shook with cold and heartbreak. "Why didn't you come when I called for you? Why didn't you listen when I said he was yours?" His eyes snapped up to hers, and for the first time she saw something shatter behind them. Not anger, not denial, guilt. "The message never reached me," he said, each word cracking with a quiet devastation she had not known he was capable of feeling. "No one told me. No one brought your words to the council. I thought you had left by choice. I thought—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening with a violent shift of emotion. The morning light brushed against his cheek, revealing the faint tremor in his lashes, the tension carved into the tendons of his neck. He looked like a man fighting a battle within himself, one he had already lost without realizing it. "I thought you wanted nothing further to do with me," he finished, voice rough, almost broken. The world tilted beneath her. She stared at him, disbelief squeezing her throat. "Why would I ever want that?" she whispered. "I carried your child. I loved you. Her words cracked, dissolving in the cold air. "I never wanted to leave." His breath caught, and for a moment the Alpha, this unshakable king, this cold ruler of an unforgiving pack, looked as though the earth had been torn from beneath him. The truth hit him like a blow, and he inhaled sharply, as if steadying himself against a pain far greater than any physical wound. Before he could speak, the baby shifted, a tiny fist curling into the cloth of her dress. The Alpha's gaze dropped again, and something ancient, primal, and unbearably tender flickered across his features. "This mark," he murmured hoarsely. She blinked, confused, until she followed his gaze and saw the faint shimmer beneath the newborn's left eye. A tiny crescent-shaped glint in the pale light, subtle but unmistakable. Her breath stilled. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." The Alpha exhaled slowly, reverently. "It is." The child bore the Lunaris sigil, a birthmark that appeared only in the firstborn heir of the royal bloodline, passed from Alpha to Alpha like a sacred seal of destiny. It was not common. It was not random. It appeared only once every generation, if it appeared at all. Her child, their child, was the rightful heir. A tremor ran down her spine, her arms instinctively tightening around him. But the council said— She choked on the memory, the accusations, the insults, the humiliation. "They lied," the Alpha growled, a deep, vibrating sound that shook frost free from the branches above them. For the first time, fury, not cold authority, not distant discipline, but true, blistering fury, burned through his eyes. "They hid the message. They hid the truth. They took from me what was mine. They exiled my heir." The trees seemed to recoil, the wind shifting with the force of his rage. She trembled, not from fear of him, but from the overwhelming shift in the world around them. Everything she had endured, the nights alone, the terror, the shame, had been built on a lie crafted by those who feared what her child represented, a threat to their power, a disruption to their fragile hold on the Alpha. He lifted a hand again, slower this time, more certain. His palm hovered above the child's cheek, close enough for warmth to touch the newborn skin. His voice dropped to a whisper that shook with a rawness she had never heard in him. "He is mine," he said. "My blood, my heir, my son." Her vision blurred with tears she had fought for months. She lowered her head, unable to stop the sob that tore from her chest. The Alpha's expression shifted, alarm flickering across his features as though the sound physically struck him. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, the words falling with the weight of something he had never spoken in his life. "I'm sorry for everything, for not finding you, for not knowing, for not—" Another sob broke her voice apart. The Alpha hesitated, torn between instinct and restraint. His hand dropped to his knee, curling into a fist, the knuckles white. She saw the war inside him, the wolf demanding to comfort her, the king demanding control, the man trapped between them. "You don't need to apologize," she managed, wiping tears with the back of a shaking hand. "You didn't know." "I should have," he murmured. "I should have felt it. I should have sensed him." His gaze darkened, jaw clenching with bitter self-reproach. "The bond should have told me." Bond. The word hung in the air like a forbidden prophecy. Her throat tightened. For months, she had tried to ignore the bond tugging at her chest, the instinctual thread connecting her to him even after exile. She had dreamed of him, felt his emotions brushing against her consciousness at night, heard echoes of his heartbeat when she closed her eyes. She had thought it was madness. She had thought it was grief, but it had been real. He looked at her now with the same realization. The bond had been there, dormant, muted by the distance, by lies, by pride, but seeing the child had ripped the veil away. He leaned closer without noticing, his body moving toward hers as though gravity had changed direction. His breath warmed her cheek, and she flinched, not from fear, but from the unbearable ache inside her chest. "You felt it too," he said, not questioning, but stating an undeniable truth. Her breath caught. She nodded, barely. The alpha exhaled through his nose, a sound filled with a depth of emotion she had never imagined him capable of. Regret, relief, something softer and far more dangerous. "You were never meant to be cast out," he said, voice lowering to something reverent. "You were meant to stand beside me." The world narrowed around her. "I'm nothing now," she whispered. "I have no rank, no home, no place in the pack." "You are the mother of the air," he replied, a growl beneath his words. "There is no higher place." A tear slid down her cheek. He reached out, hesitated, and then, for the first time since the night he had held her beneath the full moon, he touched her. His fingers brushed her face gently, wiping the tear from her skin. The warmth of his touch tore through her, unraveling her defenses, igniting memories she had tried to extinguish. His thumb traced her cheek with a tenderness she had never expected to feel again. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They stole you from me." Her breath trembled. "And now?" He looked at the child again. "Now destiny demands I take you back." The words lingered in the cold air like a vow, like a threat, like a promise intertwined with fate. She felt something ancient stir inside her, a shift, a crack, the first hint of a new beginning forged in the ashes of everything she had survived. The alpha lowered his hand to the baby's cheek at last, his fingers trembling as they touched the tiny crescent mark of the lunaris sigil. The baby opened his eyes fully. Golden, brilliant, eternal. The alpha inhaled sharply, the breath stolen from him by a truth too powerful to deny. "It's him," he whispered, voice breaking. And in that single moment, the world changed. The moment the alpha whispered those words, "It's him," the clearing seemed to constrict around them, the air tightening as if destiny itself had taken a slow, deliberate breath. The forest no longer felt like a passive witness. It watched with sharpened focus, as though the ancient trees and the snow-laden earth recognized the significance of what had just unfolded. The newborn heir rested quietly now, soothed by the warmth of her chest and the nearness of the man whose blood pulsed through his tiny veins. But as calm washed over the child, tension coiled itself around the adults like a thorned vine. The alpha rose slowly to his full height, and his presence swelled with a force that pressed against her lungs. His aura, feral, royal, impossibly dominant, expanded until it filled every corner of the clearing, pushing back the cold, pushing back the shadows, pushing even her breath deeper into her chest. She had forgotten how overwhelming he could be when he wasn't restraining himself, when he wasn't pretending to be merely a man, rather than the embodiment of an ancient bloodline. His shadow fell across her like a cloak, and she felt both shielded and exposed, protected and trapped, safe and suffocated. She lifted her gaze to him and saw it immediately, the storm building behind his eyes. Now that the truth stood undeniable between them, the weight of what it meant began to descend with crushing clarity. The council had lied. The elders had interfered. Someone within his pack had intentionally severed the bond between Alpha and Heir. Someone powerful enough, cunning enough, desperate enough to risk war with fate itself. She felt the moment he realized it too. He inhaled sharply, the breath cutting the air like a blade. His entire frame tensed, muscles coiling in tight lines beneath his cloak. Power rippled off him in waves, distorting the air like heat mirages in winter. The snow at his feet trembled, cracking faintly as though the frost dared not touch him. "When I return," he murmured, voice low and deadly, "there will be blood." She flinched at the cold promise in his words, not because she feared his violence, but because she knew he meant it. He would spill blood for the child. He would spill blood for the truth. He would spill blood for her, whether he understood that part yet or not. But then reality struck her. Return. He intended to take the child back, to return to the fortress, to reclaim what was stolen. And she, weak, exiled, shivering with cold and pain, was an afterthought, a complication, a woman with no status, a woman the pack hated, a woman the council had branded as deceitful, unworthy, unfit to stand at the Alpha's side. She drew the child closer instinctively. The Alpha's eyes flickered to the movement, narrowing slightly, not with anger, but with something sharper, awareness. "You think I would leave him?" she whispered, though her voice cracked from exhaustion. "You think I'd let him grow up among those who cast me out? Those who humiliated me?" His jaw tightened. The muscles in his forearms flexed beneath his cloak. "He is the heir," he said, his tone restrained but weighted with iron. "He must return. The pack must see him. The kingdom must acknowledge him." "The prophecy," she cut him off, her voice trembling but fierce. "The prophecy didn't save me when they exiled me. The prophecy didn't matter when they dragged me from the fortress. Why should it matter now?" The Alpha's eyes darkened, tension slicing through his expression like a shadow. "You were exiled under lies," he said, "under deceit, under manipulation I intend to root out and destroy." She swallowed. "Even if the pack refuses to accept me? Even if they still believe I'm nothing?" His breath deepened. A heartbeat passed. His gaze sharpened. "You are not nothing," he growled softly. The words shook her, not because they healed her, they didn't, but because of how fiercely he said them, how tightly his hands clenched at his sides as though fighting the instinct to reach for her. But she couldn't afford to be swept up in the gravity of his presence. Not now. Not when the stakes were so high it felt as though the ground cracked beneath every breath. Her fingers curled around the newborn's tiny form, and she felt the fragile beat of his heart. This child represented everything the Alpha stood to gain, and everything he stood to lose. "Your council won't allow me to return," she whispered. "They'll reject me again. They'll tear him from my arms. They'll claim I'm unfit." A deep guttural sound rumbled from his chest. Anger, ancient and unrestrained. "No one," he said, stepping closer, "will take him from you." A shiver ran through her. The air thickened, charged with electric tension that blurred the line between threat and promise. She felt his wolf pushing against the surface of his human form, a relentless force refusing to be contained. The bond between them pulsed, faint but undeniable, tugging at her ribs, tightening around her heart. He stood so close now she could feel his warmth soaking through her frozen clothes. His scent, pine, iron, cold earth, wrapped around her, stirring memories she wished she could forget, and emotions she wished she could silence. She felt trapped between gravity and instinct, between fear and longing. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, like a man approaching the edge of a cliff. "Show me," he murmured. Her breath hitched. "Show you what?" His fingers brushed the edge of the blanket covering the baby. "The birthmark," he said. "Let the spirits witness it. Let the truth seal itself." Her pulse quickened. She lifted the blanket slightly, exposing the subtle moonlit crescent beneath the baby's eye. The mark shimmered, responding to the presence of the Alpha, glowing faintly as if awakened by the bloodline's call. A gust of wind swept through the clearing at that precise moment, stirring the snow, bending the branches, releasing frost from their grip. It felt intentional. It felt ceremonial. The Alpha inhaled sharply, as though the sight struck him deeper than any blade ever could. "Destiny," he whispered. The word pulsed through her like a heartbeat. She lowered the blanket carefully, shielding the baby from the cold. The Alpha watched her with an expression that blended reverence, fear, wonder, and something more dangerous, a hunger for redemption. But destiny was not a gentle force. It was violent, unpredictable, a tidal wave that spared no one. And she understood, with a cold jolt of terror, that returning to the pack would ignite a war. The council would not relinquish their power. The elders who had hidden her pregnancy would not admit guilt. The nobles who resented the Alpha's unbroken bloodline would see the child as a threat. "You don't understand what awaits," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you march into the fortress with me in the air, someone will try to kill us. Someone already tried." His body stiffened. He lowered himself slowly until he was level with her again, his face inches from hers. "Who?" he asked, voice low, lethal. She swallowed. "I don't know. But the night before they exiled me, someone followed me. Someone tried to silence me before I could reach you." The Alpha's eyes burned with murder. "They will die for that," he said. Her heart faltered. The intensity of his promise shook her, not because she doubted it, but because she knew he would carve through the entire kingdom to fulfill it. "Violence won't solve everything," she whispered, even though she wasn't certain she believed it. "It will solve enough," he replied darkly. A distant howl rose in the forest, long and mournful, reminding her that danger still circled them like scavengers waiting for their moment. She looked toward the sound, fear tightening her chest again. "We can't stay here," she murmured. "They'll come again. More of them." He nodded slowly, his gaze shifting toward the horizon. "We need shelter. But not the fortress. Not yet." Confusion flickered through her. Then where? He lowered his gaze again, meeting hers with an intensity that felt like a hand closing around her heartbeat. "There is one place the council cannot touch," he said. "A place where the laws bend to me alone. A sanctuary carved from royal blood and ancient magic. Only the Alpha and his fated bond may enter." Her breath trembled. A chill crawled down her spine, not of fear, but of something far deeper. Fated bond. He had said it deliberately, acknowledging what the bond meant, acknowledging what she was. "What are you saying?" she whispered. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her cheek, his voice a quiet storm. "I'm saying you were never meant to walk alone," he murmured, "and I will not let you face the kingdom without me." Her vision blurred with tears she fought to hold back. The baby stirred, shifting against her chest. The Alpha's gaze softened at the sight, the storm in him flickering with something fragile. He rose to his full height and extended a hand. Not commanding, not demanding, but offering. "Come with me." She looked at his hand, at her child, at the forest closing in, at the path that had led her to this impossible crossroads, and she realized something terrifying. If she took his hand, everything would change, irrevocably, permanently. Destiny would collide with war. Secrets would unravel, blood would spill, hearts would break, and the kingdom would tremble beneath the weight of a truth no council could suppress. She inhaled slowly, painfully, because even though she feared him, feared the pack, feared the prophecy, she feared one thing more, facing destiny without him. The world seemed to hold its breath as she stared at the Alpha's extended hand, the cold wind curling around his fingers like a ghost urging her to step into a destiny she had never asked for, but could no longer escape. The sky above them deepened into a muted silver dawn, casting a fragile halo of light across the clearing and illuminating the faint blood splatters on the snow, reminders of the rogues whose bodies now lay lifeless among the trees. The air hummed with the aftermath of violence, with the scent of iron and frost, but beneath that lingered something softer, something fragile, something new. Possibility. The Alpha stood tall, a pillar of ancient strength carved from shadow and cold fire, waiting with a patience that looked foreign on him, as though he were fighting the instinct to seize her instead of offering. Yet the tension in his shoulders betrayed how difficult it was for him to leave the choice in her hands. He was a man born to command armies, not to ask. But for her, for the child, he was learning restraint. That realization struck her like a tremor through her bones, softening something inside her even as fear coiled tight around her chest. She adjusted the newborn in her arms, the little one shifting against her as if sensing the weight of the moment pressing down on the fragile space between them. "I don't know where this path leads," she whispered, voice thin and frayed by exhaustion. "I don't know if the pack will accept us. I don't know if I can survive returning to the world that broke me." The Alpha's gaze softened, barely, but unmistakably. "You won't walk into that world alone," he murmured. His voice carried the quiet force of a storm gathering along the horizon, slow and inevitable. "I give you my word." She closed her eyes. His word, the word of an alpha, was not a promise. It was law. He didn't make oaths lightly. He didn't give loyalty freely. And he didn't bend for anyone. Yet here he stood, hand outstretched, waiting for her. The child whimpered softly, his tiny breath warming her chest. When she opened her eyes again, she found the alpha watching her with a mixture of fierce determination and a vulnerability he would never admit. The bond pulsed faintly between them, a thread tightening with each breath, each heartbeat, each unspoken longing. If she took his hand, the bond would strengthen, the prophecy would unfurl, the kingdom would tremble, and a war, political, spiritual, and emotional, would ignite. But if she didn't, the forest would consume them, the rogues would return, and the child, their heir, would die before destiny even had the chance to shape him. She inhaled shakily and extended her hand. His fingers closed around hers with a warmth that cut through the cold, like a flame pressed against her palm. The moment their skin touched, the bond surged like lightning wrapped in silk, unfurling through her veins, drawing her into him with a gravitational pull older than any pack law. His breath caught sharply, a quiet sound of recognition, of surrender. She felt it too. The world tilted. For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the forest, the wind, even the tiny breaths of the baby. Then the alpha gently pulled her to her feet. She swayed from weakness, but he steadied her, one hand hovering near her waist, though he did not touch her again. Not yet. His restraint, more than anything, nearly broke her. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "We need to leave before the next wave comes. Rogues travel in packs, small ones at first, then larger groups when they smell blood." She nodded, the memory of growls and snapping branches still fresh in her trembling muscles. The alpha stepped closer, his presence enveloping her like a cloak, warm despite the cold. "There is a hidden path," he said quietly. "A trail used only by my bloodline. Old magic guards it. No council member, no elder, no wolf outside my lineage can step foot on it and live." Her breath trembled. "Where does it lead?" He met her gaze with an intensity that sent heat through her even in the freezing air. "To the Moonspire Sanctuary." Her heart skipped. The sanctuary of the Alpha bloodline was not myth. It was older than the fortress itself. A place carved from stone and magic where kings meditated, where fated bonds were sealed, where heirs were blessed under ancient rites. It was sacred, forbidden, untouched for generations. "Only mates of the Alpha may enter," she whispered. A faint flicker crossed his expression. Not denial, not affirmation. Something deeper, something inevitable. "The sanctuary recognizes blood and destiny," he said quietly. "It will open for you." She felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from the realization that destiny had already wrapped its claws around her life long before she understood it. She shifted her child, trying to absorb the warmth of his tiny body, grounding herself even as the world felt like it was tilting into a path she had never imagined. The Alpha turned, scanning the trees with the precision of a hunter. "We have little time. Follow me." He began walking, slow enough for her weakened body to keep pace, but purposeful, every step infused with power held tightly in check. She hesitated only a moment before following, her boots crunching the frost, each breath burning in her lungs. As they moved deeper into the forest, she caught the scent of pine sap thickening, the air changing subtly, as if shifting between worlds. The path beneath them narrowed until she saw faint runes etched into the ground, moonlit symbols winding through the earth like glowing veins. Her breath stilled. "This is ancient magic," she whispered. "Older than the packs." "Older than the first Alpha," he said. "My father brought me here once. Only once. He said the sanctuary reveals what the heart fears most, before it reveals what it desires." Cold fear washed over her. "And what if the heart fears everything?" she asked softly. He slowed, turning just enough for their eyes to meet. "Then the sanctuary will show you only the truth." Truth. The one thing she wanted and feared more than anything. They walked in silence for several minutes, the runes glowing brighter with every step. The forest grew unnaturally still, the wind dying, the earth softening beneath their feet. It was as though they were slipping into the memory of a world long forgotten. Then suddenly, the trees parted. Before them rose a towering stone archway covered in frost, vines and moonlit glyphs. The arch pulsed faintly with magic, alive, waiting. Her breath hitched. The Alpha stepped forward, but before crossing through, he turned to her fully. His eyes were no longer the hard, disciplined gaze of a king. They were gentler now, burdened, burning with the weight of everything he had not said. "Once we enter," he murmured, "there is no turning back. The sanctuary will test us. It will test our fears, our truths, our bond." She swallowed hard, and if we fail, his jaw tightened. Then destiny will choose another path, and it will not be kind. A shiver ran down her spine. She tightened her hold on the baby, and the Alpha's gaze flickered to the child with an expression so raw it sent a lump into her throat. "He is the heir," she whispered. "He deserves whatever truth awaits. And so do you," he said softly. The gentleness in his voice almost undid her. She steadied herself, drew a breath she hoped would not shatter her ribs, and nodded. The Alpha extended his hand again. This time, she placed her hand in his without hesitation. They stepped through the arch together. The world shifted. Light burst around them, soft and silver, wrapping them in warmth that pierced the cold buried in her bones. The baby stirred but did not cry. The Alpha tightened his hold on her hand, his thumb brushing her skin in a gesture of instinct rather than thought. She felt the bond pulse again, stronger now, alive. The sanctuary hummed, ancient and accepting, and as the air thickened with magic, as destiny curled its fingers around their lives, a single truth crystallized inside her. Their story was no longer theirs alone. The kingdom would rise or fall by what happened next, and whatever destiny had planned, whatever darkness or revelation awaited them, she would face it not as an exile, not as a forgotten woman, but as the mother of the heir, as the fated bond of the Alpha, as the beginning of a prophecy being rewritten by blood and fire. The sanctuary doors opened wider, light spilling like moon water at their feet. The Alpha leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear, voice a low vow carved from thunder. "No matter what you see inside," he whispered, "you are not alone. You belong with me." Her heart stilled, her breath caught, and the world, quiet, suspended, waiting, seemed to whisper back, "This is only the beginning."